All right, we're going to look at text animation in this video, and specifically we're going to look at text animation that occurs when something scrolls into view. So where we're going is something like this, where I scroll into view, this text animates in, or maybe I scroll into view and this text animates out. Okay, we're going to be doing this with JavaScript, and I'm going to run through this demo as if you know little or nothing about JavaScript. That's absolutely fine. JavaScript is a language that we use to make sites interactive, to respond to a user, things like this. And the important thing to know is when we're doing more complicated coding projects like this, we are very often going to be building on other people's work. So here I'm primarily using this JavaScript plugin, this piece of JavaScript code called Textulate. And even this piece of code is building off of these other pieces of code that other people have written. So when we start writing fancy code, more complicated code, we start to really draw on the work of others more, okay, because it gets more complicated. This means that if we look at our HTML file, we're going to notice a couple things. So we've pulled in other CSS files before. So here we're just pulling in a CSS file that I know that Textulate needs. Okay, this is my CSS file that I'll be writing in. And at the bottom of our page, right before we close our body, we're going to include our JavaScript files. So this is a JavaScript file that Bootstrap needs. These are JavaScript files that Textulate needs. This is a JavaScript file that helps us watch when elements come in and out of view. And then finally, this is the JavaScript file that we will be writing in. So all of this stuff, you'll just remix this demo or you'll include it on your own. And we don't worry about it, we just include it. It's like background, okay? Project.js is the file that we'll be working in, and let's take a quick look at the HTML that we have. Really, really simple HTML. All we need to pay attention to is we have 3 H1s, and each of those H1s has an ID. First, second, and third. And those IDs are how we're going to be pointing to these things in JavaScript. So let's take a look at that. When we are setting up these animations, we are going to do 2 things for each animation in our JavaScript file. So at the top of my file, I'm going to set up my animations and give it all the options for each animation. Tell it like how fast I want it to be, which animation style I want, things like that. So all of this code does that for the thing with ID second. This looks just like a CSS selector. It acts like one, okay? When I'm editing this, all I'm really going to need to change are the values of things, okay? So auto start false says, I don't want you to animate automatically. I'm going to tell you when to animate. That's what we want for this demo. These are my options for my in animation, okay? So I've got different in effects. And if you go to this page, textulate.js.org, you can see these are all my different in animations. Okay, and I'm going to keep it with what it has right now. I'm going to keep it fade in. You can play with these. We'll look at them a little bit later. But again, all I would ever need to do is change the values here. I'm not changing commas, semicolons, braces, anything like that. And here's my out animation options. Okay, so once I've done that, I'm going to have one more thing I'm going to do. And we do that down here. This line just says, hey, wait until the web page is ready. So we're just going to ignore it. And then I've got this block of code which handles watching for when that second H1 comes in and out of view, okay? So thing with ID second, we're gonna watch it. When it comes into view, we're gonna do this. And when it leaves view, we're gonna do this. So let's take a look at this when it comes into view section. This is what's gonna happen when it comes into view. And again, we're only looking at little parts of this, okay? So we say, the thing that has ID second. And then this is kind of a weird thing, but we're just going to go with it. We want it to come in, right? We want it to animate in. So we're going to say go out and then go in. Okay, again, we don't need to worry about this, but just we'll go out and then in, and that's going to give us the effect we want. Okay, so let's take a look at how this works. If I refresh, I'm going to get to the second one, and it's going to come in. Okay. So when it comes into view, find the thing with ID second, go out, and then in. This number here sets a delay in milliseconds. So 500 milliseconds is half a second. And that would give me something where it's going to wait a second before second comes in. Okay. So you can play with that and kind of adjust the experience there. This tells it what to do when that element leaves the viewport. We're just going to have it go away. We're not going to see it, but we want it to go away. Okay, so that when I come back, it can fade in again. The only other thing we need to look at here is that when something is coming in, a lot of times we want it hidden at first, right? This fade in wouldn't look as good if this was already on the screen and then it faded in. So what I've done is I've added a class to that second H1. Okay, so it has class animating in, and that's a class that I wrote, and it just has visibility hidden. And all that means is that when we first load our page, this is not visible, and then we're going to fade it in. So that's something special about fading in to be aware of. All right, let's take a look at this third one because it's going to work basically exactly the same, except for now it's fading out, it's leaving. So again, I'm setting up animations. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to set all my options for the thing that has ID third, okay? Primarily, I'm thinking about what effect do I want when it goes out, and I could play with this. So on my documentation page, I can say, okay, these are all my different animations, and maybe I want to choose a different one, okay? And I could also change and mess with things like the delay here. So if we change that to 500, we can see what happens here. We're going to wait a second. So that makes it really slow. Okay, so a lot of control over that. I'll set it back. Once I'm happy with my options here, I'm going to come down, and we said this was for my second one. So this is for my third one. This is what happens when it comes into view. And you'll see I've set a longer delay here because when we fade things out, we want to read them and then we want to have them leave, right? So I might even want 2 or 3 seconds there. Otherwise, this says the thing with ID third, and we're going out, so we're going to do the same thing where we're going to say in and then out. We're not going to worry about why we do that. We just want in and then out, okay? And then when it leaves the screen, we want it to come back in so that when we scroll back, it can go away again. And that's going to give us a 3-second delay. We go away. Once it leaves the screen, it's going to come back. We go back to it. It can leave again. Okay, that's the basics of what we're doing. If you feel good with it, remix this, start playing with it. Get fancy, try things. If you don't, let's do this. Let's animate this first one because right now this first one isn't animated, okay? So let's make this first one fade in, all right? So we're gonna do a couple things. First, I'm gonna give it class animating in, and we'll see what that's gonna do is hide it. Okay, that's good. We want it to fade in, so we want it hidden first. Now we're gonna go to our JavaScript file and we're gonna do two things. Okay, so first we're going to copy this and we're gonna set up our animation options. And so this, instead of the thing that has ID second, I'm gonna find the thing that has ID first. For in, fade in, I'm gonna keep fade in, okay? I might change some of this. Out doesn't really matter too much, but I'm gonna keep it. And now I'm gonna come down here and I'm going to grab all of this. And let's make one for the thing that has ID first. So find the thing that has ID first, okay? When it comes into view, this is what I'm gonna do. So again, thing that has ID first, I want it to come in, so I'm gonna go out and then in, and this is my delay. And maybe we want it to wait a second there. When it goes out, again, I'm finding the thing that has first, and I'm going out. So let's see if it worked. Okay, we go in, we scroll down, second appears, we scroll up, first appears. Okay, as you play with these, you'll notice some little differences. So some of these behave differently, right? If we change this to ta-da instead of fade in, ta-da doesn't really fade in, right? It stays visible and it just has that animation. So, there's little differences for how you're going to have to treat these, but that is the basics for animation as we scroll.